Hey everyone, we're very happy to welcome you into today's session where we'll explore how manufacturers can move beyond AI pilots to achieve real, scalable impact, from transforming data visibility and automation to empowering the workforce and realizing tangible business results. My name is Alexia, representing Connect Global Group. Today's webinar is made possible thanks to our esteemed partners at Cognizant, and we're very happy for their support. Now, before we begin, I'd like to quickly cover some essential housekeeping points. You'll find a range of interactive widgets at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to customize them to suit your viewing needs. If you have any questions during this session, please send them through at any time. If we run out of time, we'll get back to you via email to ensure your question is addressed in full. Also, keep an eye out for the webinar recording, which will be sent to you shortly via email after the event concludes. On that note, I'll pass it over to Anuj, who will kickstart today's discussion. Anuj, over to you.
So, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to our global audience, and especially to our guests, from wherever you have joined. My name is Anuj. I'm responsible for our IoT and engineering practice in Cognizant for EMEA and Asia Pacific. And given the transformations that we're seeing, and we're talking about Gen AI and Agentic AI, we're here to talk to our specialist panelists, who've joined from the field or from the manufacturing organizations, two very diverse organizations that we would talk to. And we hope to have a very, very interesting conversation going forward. So with that, I would also like to introduce Sharath, who has joined us from US, to do a quick introduction, and we quickly move to our guests as well.
Great. Thank you, Anuj, and welcome to all of you for this very interesting conversation, very topical, AI in manufacturing and what we can do to adopt this at scale. So we are very excited about this conversation. I'm with Cognizant, and I'm the smart manufacturing offering leader working out of our development centers in Chicago, and happy to be here on this conversation. I'll request Ravindra to introduce himself, please.
Hey, thanks, Sharath and Anuj. Happy to be here. Good morning, everyone. Actually, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. I'm Ravi Sachin. I'm an advanced manufacturing operation and technology profession. Been in the industry for around 20 years now. I'm based out of Cary, have located multiple places within the United States. I'm really looking forward to this discussion. Thank you.
Miguel, you want to go next?
Hello, good afternoon from Spain in this case. Excited to be here also to talk about this famous topic today, EA. My name is Miguel Ángel. I'm an engineer and I work as a production manager in Deutsche Group in Europe, mostly related with the shop floor management and in the manufacturing products from component from diesel engines. And I think it's a big discussion in all the companies how to go to the pilot or to escalate or to affect to the organization and so on. And I think it's a good opportunity to share knowledge and to interchange opinions.
Thank you, Miguel, and once again, very welcome, Miguel and Ravindra, to this interesting webcast, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation as well. And as Miguel said, all the organizations, I think we can safely say almost every organization is on their journey of adopting Gen AI or Agentic AI in different stages. Some have scaled, some have not so much. In fact, we just come off with a stellar quarterly performance of Q3, of 7% year-on-year growth with good operating profit growth as well. And one of the key features, one of the key reasons for that is that our story and our transformations on AI have been benefiting with that to our clients as well. So I would like Sharath, I would like to request Sharath to talk us through the white paper that we recently published, If you haven't already seen it, then at the end of the presentation, we will have a QR code that you can download, which talks about engineering AI into the factory of the future. And that's the topic that we're going to talk to both Ravindra and Miguel in the next 40-45 minutes as well. Sharad, over to you, please.
Thank you, Anuj. Yeah, so what we're trying to do in this, it's a very short deck. It's really a summary of what we have already presented in the white paper. We thought we will give a very quick overview of this so that your context, you're all grounded in the same context. What we are trying to do in this is to identify those five and a few key business imperatives that drive and deliver high value returns on investment using AI, specifically with the lens of how AI can be used in the factory of the future and how you should go beyond pilot in order to realize those results. Now, what we're saying is, at the outset, the premise is that AI and automation are critical levers that manufacturers are already exploiting. The reasons for this are pretty clear. Firstly, it is to boost productivity. How can you do more with the same amount of resources that you have? How can you increase resilience? Which means, there are so many external factors affecting, shop floor operations today. How do you kind of build a buffer zone so that anything that happens externally does not immediately impact your shop floor operations? And three, how do you manage and how do you overcome disruption? So these are the three critical forces at play within a factory. And we see that AI is playing more and more of a central role in addressing these moving blocks. Several studies have been done in the market. One of them, Cognizant and Oxford Economics, came together to look at the future. Look at several different roles that are getting impacted by AI. And a summary of this is what we mentioned here. Overall productivity gains through AI is upwards of $1 trillion in the next decade or so. But the more interesting thing is from a manufacturing perspective, it's not only, of course, force multiplier to address these different challenges, but it's also a competitive advantage for manufacturers and therefore the motivation to drive towards scale. But really, coming into the four walls of a factory, what is the business case? Why is it so interesting, right? One of the things that we have done, and this is really a learning across several types of manufacturers and several types of industrial environments or shop floor environments, we see operational efficiency improvements, energy optimization opportunities, especially in Europe. A lot of demand on worker productivity, how you can change or optimize your supply chain and logistics function. How do you manage material movement? How do you manage inventory, finished goods? How do you reduce waste? How do you maximize or minimize scrap? And how can you plan your procurement processes better? All these lead to a very significant amount of value creation for enterprises, be it process industries, be it discrete industries. There's a tremendous amount of value. And we see AI playing a pretty central role because it has the ability to cut across these different systems, cut across different technologies that manufacturers already use, and synthesize information from different sources and point out, give some insights that can help drive improvements. So the business case is pretty compelling, is really the summary. But in order to adopt AI at scale, what we have seen as learnings from many places is what we have summarized in this white paper. So firstly, just as you saw in the previous slide, we need to let business priorities lead technology decisions. There is already a plethora of different technologies and factories. You don't want to add more to it without really there being a justifiable business reason. So we need to let business take the decision on that, on what needs to be solved, what really ails the factory. Based on that, you define the rest of the architecture, bring in the right kind of technologies. Two, bring the data from all sources. Today almost a third of the factory assets are old, legacy, and therefore dark. You don't get any meaningful information from those assets or systems. So you need to bring all of them out so that you can build an AI system that really looks at every corner. And third one, while you are bringing data out of the factory, you need to embed cybersecurity from day one, because AI has the ability to go into everything and create risks as well. So you need to really ensure yourself from exposure from all of that. Fourth one is agents are going to rule the roost going forward, more and more AI agents. And the goal is really to go towards an autonomous operation in the future. So in order to do that, you got to start your design process, embedding the agentic AI architecture at the outset. And finally, the users for all of this technology are the workers on the shop floors. How do you start equipping them so that they become responsible users, they become effective users of AI and the technologies around AI? Now, there are different vectors. There are different ways in which you can drive this transformation. This is one such view that Cognizant has prepared. Initially, the first vector to consider is how can you look at, driving more productivity gains, productivity improvements, and that comes from creating the right kind of data foundation, right kind of data and AI management, and the right kind of decision-making methods and systems. So that will really help you in maybe retiring some of your existing technical debt, improves faster decision making from the time you gain insights. So that's really driving hyper productivity. The next thing, or almost in parallel to that, will be how do you industrialize the use of data and start helping the customers, helping the manufacturers drive more and more modernized business models, perhaps. Look at helping them create new revenue streams. Is it a batch of one that you want to help your customers or manufacturers achieve? Those are the approaches that you want to use in industrializing AI. And the last one is agentifying the entire enterprise to take these agents to work across different functional areas and really, hyperpower the manufacturers that way. So there are, like I said, there are different vectors. This is just one such. Finally, you need to create this roadmap for the future. And what we have shown here is almost a 5-year roadmap, which deals with bringing the right kind of technology, bringing the right ways of working, bringing the right ecosystem together, time boxing all of these into different periods so that you can start realizing value at each of these different intermediate milestones, so that you start your AI journey with scale in mind, with the right kind of partnerships in mind, with the right kind of transformative outcomes in mind. So this is what we have tried to put together in the white paper. Obviously, there's a lot more detail in that, but all of that is just a white paper. Our whole objective of this webinar was to bring practitioners such as Ravi and Miguel. We want to tap into their expertise and into their experiences in consuming AI. And I'll turn it over to Anuj so that we can have a very, very engaging conversation with both Ravi and Miguel and glean insights out of their experiences. Over to you, Anuj.
Thank you so much, Sharat. And as you put it rightly, a very good summary of the white paper that we have released quite recently. And I think this webinar is all about, giving an opportunity to the SMEs to talk from their experience. So I'm not going to delay that any further. So maybe, Ravi, we start from you. Given that manufacturers have been adopting automation, AI, and ML, for a very long time, we saw the fourth industrial revolution in 2011. People have been talking about cloud adoption, robotic, IoT, Internet of Things, cybersecurity, and so on. So maybe I'll break the question into two parts. Number one, do you see that manufacturers are still kind of hesitating to adopt or to scale Gen AI or agentic AI? And if you do, then what are the barriers that are preventing them? If you could share your views on that, please.
Yeah, absolutely, Anuj. Thank you so much. That's an excellent question. I've seen and experienced manufacturers struggle to identify and execute the POC, and also to move from POC to scaling up the deployment. So I have categorized into 3 areas, based on my experience, where the barriers are, and I can definitely provide some insight on that. So the first and foremost, most important thing is the business alignment, and many AI pilots and are mostly technology driven, rather than problem driven. Right? What problem are you going to solve? I think so. That's the narrative needs to be changed, and are mostly using top-down approach to integrate AI without clear storytelling between financial matrix and integration into the KPI. Talking into the layman terms. Is going to improve OEE, scrap, etc. So normally, what I have done in the past is just start focusing on what the problem is, what problem are we going to solve, right? And the second important thing there is, to have a robust pipeline and a roadmap. Start with the big picture, right? I mean, you're just going to focus on targeted area there. So mostly the AI project will get stuck in the pilot phase or, post-pilot phase. And the struggle continues with the investment requirement, right? So you have to have that long-term roadmap before you even start with the POC, because it will demand, executive sponsorship and, cross-plant standardization. So there are other discussions that will come into the play. So that's around the business alignment side. Again, I mean, just to add to that is AI manufacturing ecosystem as of today is very crowded and fragmented. There are multiple vendors, with predictive maintenance, quality inspection. So the technology selection that align with your process and industry is critical, right? So vendor selection is important there. But the second, the most important thing I would say is the infrastructure and the data. Based on my experience, I've seen, dozens of legacy systems like MES, SCADA, ERP, and then there are different PLCs that are 30 years old. Most often they don't talk to each other. They are in silos and they are not connected. Similar to, edge devices, PLCs, and, industrial sensors, they were not built with AI in mind back then. So I saw, sir, talking about the foundation and modernization. That is the most important thing, because many times, we come up with a solution to solve a problem, but there's a little talk or discussion upfront about, modernization and foundation. And the last one is I would say, is talent and organization silos. So most of the time, manufacturing firm, often lack the hybrid talent. There are people who are very good with domain knowledge and process engineering side, and there's a separate group of people who are SMEs for technology. So I think developing and building that hybrid talent is going to be the key, the most important thing to kind of not just execute and implement, but also sustain it.
Thank you so much, Ravi. That was really insightful, and also kind of reflects what we've written in the white paper as well. So Miguel, if I can ask the same question, what do you see as barriers, and where do you see the manufacturers have been able to scale up, and why?
Yes, first of all, I completely agree with Ravindra. I experienced the same barriers in my career. I have identified 4 points from my point of view. The first of one, to scale a pilot or to go ahead with the AI projects, in my point of view, is the rentability. Is important to check the ROE of the project, otherwise the project didn't go ahead. That's very important in my experience, because it's difficult to explain one project without revenue in a couple of years or 3 years, more or less. The second one I identified, agree with Ravindra, is the data silos and the quality of data and inconsistent. Most of the time is related with the lack of unified architecture in the company, because the company evolve very quickly, and normally one technology go above another technology. This mixes different technology, different machine, old machine, new machine. It's difficult to unify all the data and the data system in the company. That is a big barrier in my experience. And the next one are related with the people. I think could be the most important because the technology is there. It's not problem. You only have to pay. But the people is different. I think one of the most important barriers is the cultural and organizational resistance. As Ravindra also say, it's difficult to change the culture of the company, and some of these projects is not only digitalization or software or something like that. It's a bit more. It's a big project. It's a cultural project because in my experience, normally the people have to change the way they work, they made the work. They have to change the mindset. I think that is really important. And also it's really important to take into account the talent of the people and the skills of the people. Related with the previous point, the talent of the young people is more connected with the new technology, but the old people is not good enough. The difference between this generation is important, and the talent is not the same. Also, the skills. You need to skill to work as a team, to be autonomous, to take decisions, and so on. And they are soft skill, and normally the school don't teach to in the soft skill, only in the hard skills. That's my point of view.
Absolutely, I completely agree with that, Miguel. And I've also heard a popular saying, right? Culture has eats strategy for breakfast. So culture is very important, but that's exactly what AI is trying to do, right? It is challenging tradition. So my question to you, I'll ask you first because you are a production leader and you manage a plant. So how do you see the role of AI in improving workflow or workforce productivity and helping in decision making in the shop floor? Because AI is actually trying to come in there to help the workforce in the shop floor. So how do you see that helping?
I think it's really important point in the future because they give us the opportunity to go from automation of the process to augmentation of the process. It's not only the people load and unload because we automatize the process, and the people have to decide and to solve the problem. And the EA can help the people to solve the problem with historical data, with the process, with the data, with the reference of the spare part, a lot of things to do to give the people the knowledge they didn't have. I think it's a important point because the autonomy of the workforce in the factory floor reduce all the structure around the production and make this structure could be another tax and add more value, new business or something like that. But I think it's a good opportunity to use EA from this augmentation, I say, okay? Also, the decision making is a decision democratization, if you want to say, okay? Because the people have the tools and the knowledge to make the decision. In the past, this decision, for example, in the quality control, something like that, it's made by other people in the office or something like that. With these tools, we can make the decision at the moment they need in the place we need.
Perfect. Thanks for that. Ravi, any views from your side on the role of AI in improving workflow and workforce productivity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I concur with Miguel on the speed of decision making and solving problem. That's a timely question. I'm glad you brought it up. AI will transfer, how people are operating and working in the shop floor. not just the software, I will extend it beyond, software, beyond manufacturing, beyond the four walls to logistic and, other operational environment test labs. And this is evolving very quickly, actually. And, I remember in the past, how it was supporting the automation. I think that it's gonna move from supporting to automation to enhancing, human decision making. So, I mean, I think when someone mentioned about, Industry 4.0, now we are at the cusp of Industry 5.0. And, I think it all began with, automating repetitive, simple, and dangerous tasks. That was the automation, right? And now it is moving forward toward, augmented intelligence, giving human operators real-time insights to act and make decisions, or predict for decision support to continuously improve. It's all part of the continuous improvement. When you talk about transformation and lean, it's not about, I think it's more about empowering them versus replacing people, right? So it's actually empowered. So, for example, predictive maintenance systems that uses, and we have used that in the past, sensor data to predict when it's going to fail. I mean, this is a mature technology. A lot of people, before even AI came in, there was some correlation model, right? And but I think it's gonna when you talk about the AI, it's gonna actually help. Gen AI especially. You get the data insights. AI is gonna do that, give you the insight where the problem is, which to target. But it's gonna generate the solution also now. With all that knowledge coming in, that will be the key, because sometimes it takes a long time. When you look at the problem solving tool like A3, PTC, ADMAC, other things, how do you manage complex problems? I think so that's going to actually help. So you don't have to start from scratch. You'll have something to work on. So that will help, improve the productivity eventually. If it is a new product introduction, or you talk about, solving the current problem within the factory. So AI tool can upskill and empower operator, I feel like, to summarize that, rather than displace them. And it will enable a continuous improvement culture within the shop floor. It will act as an assistant for the people in the shop floor.
Thank you so much, Ravi. And you rightly said there are lots of AI use cases beyond the shop floor itself, right? And that's probably my next question is about the AI use cases. In fact, recently, Cognizant made the Guinness Book of World Record of the largest hackathon event on vibe coding, where about 50,000 of our people participated in that hackathon together at the same time. And we saw how many different use cases which we hadn't even thought about. And probably that's my next question, probably first to Miguel and then to Ravi, is that how do you see the AI use cases being different, for example, in a discrete versus a process manufacturing? Miguel, if you want to share your thoughts on that.
So, well, in discrete manufacturing, I think a lot of use cases identify, for example, in predictive maintenance, they are high way to work, because in this case manufacturing, you don't have a continuous process. You have different machine, different location, different technology, different supplier, and it is difficult to organize a system to predictive maintenance. And you have to specify every machine and so on. And I think it's a use case in the future. Also, quality inspection, as is clear for me, because in the past, a metal part, we need to check visually, for example. Now we have different systems, robotic cameras, and most important, we can record all this data and use all this data and learn from all this data. This is very important now, because they give more knowledge, our products and our process of quality control. Also, AI help us to the interconnectivity of the machine, because this new technology, we are in the hype, in the initial point of the curve, but I think in the future it will be a exponential evolution, because they are very flexible. You can adapt all this data to two machines, or this process on the other one every week, every month they release a new app, a new functionality, a new one, and you can adapt. And I think it's a good advantage because in the past you buy a software and the software is the same and you can adapt, or it's too difficult to adapt. And this new technology give us the possibility to adapt on each process in case we have. This is a good news for us. Also from the process around the production, I mean energy efficiency or process control stability, something like that. They give us a new opportunity, a new way of thinking about how we make this kind of tasks.
Thank you, Miguel. Ravi, your thoughts?
Yes, and thanks for bringing this up. And yes, I can definitely say that AI use cases differ significantly between discrete and the process. I worked in both discrete manufacturing and continuous process manufacturing, largely because two type of industries have different production characteristic and different data types, different operational challenges, different technologies that goes in there, right? So, I mean, just to summarize real quick, since Miguel kind of hit the nail on the head there, discrete manufacturing is, I talk about batch production, distinct items you can count, I'm not going to deep dive into, into what is discrete manufacturing versus the process manufacturing, which is more continuous flow, like chemicals or, resins or anything else, more homogeneous products. So when you talk about the data nature, right, in the discrete manufacturing is more event-based and its data is more discrete, like batch processing. When you talk about the process manufacturing, it's time series and continuous. So that's the basic difference. And then we talk about the integration point is sometimes different. I would say, MES robotics is more prominent in discrete, for planning, a lot of things is more complicated, I would say, versus process manufacturing where SCADA and, DCS, process historian is very prevalent there, and look at that. Use cases, I would say there's, some overlap definitely, but Miguel touched about predictive maintenance is there, computer vision for quality is there. The one big thing that is coming up is the safety now. Safety can be tied to both, right? And there's a lot of AI cameras available now, technologies where you can, utilize off the shelf. Supply chain, I think, so is kind of shared between both. Now the robots are coming with AI powered technologies, right, where they can self-correct and, so there's definitely, a difference there. You have to be very careful, what you choose when you work with, technology and integrators there. But that's my experience with both the processes.
True, not just robots, right? Now humanoids are also coming into the factory. So, how do you secure those humanoids, gantries and whatnot? Those things are coming. So speaking of all of those, right, there should be a method of, governance, right? Or challenges around securing data, and how do you roll out these AI solutions securely and sustainably across different sites globally, right? What kind of governance mechanism should be in place? Any thoughts on that, Ravi?
And sure, then that's a very practical question, right? And I think everyone will have this question before they start their journey. And again, it's not just tied to the AI. So, deploying AI securely and sustainably across multiple sites. When I say that, for example, for a global enterprise, where they have multiple sites and operations, or the operation is distributed, right? It's as much as about governance and data management as it is about algorithms and, I talk about infrastructure. So that has to be talked in parallel, it's not just looking at your infrastructure modernization, how you are going to provide that. I mean, based on my experience, so far, I'm not an IT guy, so, but, I've worked extensively with collaborated with our IT group here. So I would say there are 2 points here. One is data governance and infrastructure, right? I mean, some of the challenges that I've seen there is, around the inconsistent data quality and undocumented data provenance there. this lack of visibility, how data moves between, sites can create sometimes compliance issues and trust issues because, so what's needed? I mean, and I came across this terminology a couple of years back is UNS architecture. It normally provides a standardization, common language across, the enterprise. It also helps with the scaling also now, you're getting data from sensors, PLC, ERP, multiple system. So it's much easier to integrate and analyze. The other critical thing, from the infrastructure standpoint, is security standpoint, like network segmentation, where we can put a critical equipment and processes in that, secure network, so you're not exposing. So you don't need to actually have the entire site of operation or enterprise into, that secure, because there are different levels of security needed for different types of data, right? The second area I would say is more about, localization, access control, and the security, right? And for example, there are different jurisdictions, different sites. Like for example, Europe GDPR, right? And China has CSL. US is more sectoral law. So which kind of restricts how do we store and use the data and proceed with it, right? So I think so the federated data structure, and this is again, it's not a new term, but it's normally, it's architecture approach that I've seen that has been recommended to me to keep the data local while we are sharing at the same time. So basically it doesn't copy the data, it's just using the insights from that. And again, there's some very best practices that happen in the industry. So you don't have to reinvent the wheel, like zero trust security models are there that I've seen being utilized, and identifying the federation across the sites, encryption, and there are other key solutions or, suggestions and recommendation best practices in place. So these are some of my thoughts and based on my understanding, on dealing with governance and in data security things.
Thank you so much, Ravi. I think I just want to go back to the use cases. And Miguel, since you are heading a plant, I'm sure you would have heard so many different use cases of AI, right? You talked about predictive maintenance, health and safety, and so on. Now, some of them obviously have a direct benefit in terms of cost savings. Some of them may not have any dollar value. So how do you prioritize which business case or which use case to implement, and and get the funding from the business?
We have to prioritize the project, and we have to use our KPIs. That is really important for us. But to prioritize, we have productivity is for us really important in Spain and in Europe in the software management. That is a key point for our project. Improve the productivity. Also quality, of course. That is true. We have a good level of quality. In case we can improve the levels of quality, it's okay, but it's difficult because we have in a good rate, and improve a little bit is too expensive now. Maybe with some technology we can find some slots really cheaper to improve. But that is true. From time to time, we use a lot of resource to get this quality results. That is a way we use cobot, for example, with artificial intelligence and visual cameras, and we can improve with a new development this resource we can reduce because we eliminate the variability of the people. That is really important. 5 years ago, 6 years ago, is not in the maturity enough this technology to achieve this result, and they are developing really fast in the last year, especially in my experience the vision camera, for example, also the treatment of the data. But this is a good point for us. Other case is safety. We identify as Ravindra says some safety case Of course, in this case, it's not a matter of cost. It's a matter of, in some cases, even save lives. And that is not in discussion. In this discussion, we apply directly. That is more or less my point.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Ravi, I'm sure you probably have the same challenge on going and getting funding for scaling up some of these projects. How do you prioritize that?
Yeah, no, I think so. That's the most important, like I mentioned, in my first first question about the barriers, right? The business alignment, and um, I think so. Manufacturers I've seen increasing investing in AI, but the key challenge is, to link it to a tangible benefits or scalable outcomes, right? And so the strategy that that I have followed, last 5 to 8 years is crawl, walk, and run strategy, fail fast strategy. So and starting with a small low hanging fruit, with the POC, doing the proof of concept there, and showing the values. Once that value is seen within the organization, and again, that's what the concept of the POC is. Fail fast, right? And so normally, tying to the KPIs, right? The very standard KPIs, QDCC, right? When you talk about the safety first, right? And like I said, I give you the example in the past is vision cameras with the AI technology. I think so that is picking up the speed. The second is quality, and that's quality. I think so is a very sensitive topic because it is directly tied to the customer experience, right? And how do we improve that? So I think so telling the story is going to be the critical. So you should have a 360-degree view, right? One solution can impact multiple areas there. It can improve the efficiency, reduce. So how do you tell the story, extract the value from each different matrices that you have and combine it? Sometimes only efficiency improvement is not going to be helpful. So you have to bring in safety thing. Hey, I'll give you an instant when you're implementing this autonomous robot, and then he mentioned that, hey, I mean, it's going to actually reduce the number of accidents there. So there was a cost associated with that. There was loss of work there, the training involved and medical expenses. So it came to around 20,000-30,000 per year on that one. So that all adds up. So I feel like, you should actually have that 360 view. Be clear on the scope, what problem you're going to be solving. There will be primary problem you will be solving, but there's some secondary benefits you can also claim on. So, I mean, there's no magic pill for that. I would say, no template, but you have to do your homework and make sure what problem you're solving and how the benefits are going to impact, and you should be able to tie it to your P&L at the end of the day.
I'll ask a question, Ravi. I'll continue on that, right? While you're doing this prioritization and doing a 360-degree view, one constant message that we see or hear from the market, innovation, it has to be driven through an innovation team. But then, the operations teams are doing more tactical and here and now kind of things. So how do manufacturers need to balance bringing innovation and driving this in parallel with operations?
So that's a great question. Again, I think it's a forward-thinking question and a very important one. I mean, as I see the AI continues to reshape manufacturing, the competitiveness will hinge on the mix of technology, the strategy, and the human partnership, right? What is your core capabilities? And here's how the landscape will shape and what capabilities will be critical. I feel like, some of the core capabilities and the adoption of the technology of, the AI-driven process optimization. We talked fairly well, I guess, in our previous questions about that, how to solve the problem, how can we optimize the process and extract the value out of that, preventive, predictive maintenance. Digital twin is going to be, I think, so very important. One most important thing that people don't understand is the automation has to happen. be happening first before you can, you need to have a data, you need to have some kind of information that you can, so building that foundation will be critical. So that AI-driven process optimization will be key. The other one is automation and robotics intelligence, I would say. Like you mentioned about the humanoid, I think so it is still 5, 6 years, 10 years out, but there's still a lot of things that can be done around that. Traditional automation will adapt into adaptive automation, right? Uh, so the robots will adapt itself. We're still within the cages, but it will do the job. So it will need less attention or correction from the human beings, and there's less interaction. Um, Integration of the computer vision is other key thing. Camera technology have been advanced so much now. With AI coming in place, you have the tech stack. Um, that will definitely, because that will be kind of a sensory technology that will help AI advance further, because that's where the data is going to come from, right? And automating will help, right? For example, if I have to see someone or enter the data manually, right? Versus if I can capture the data automatically, that will be the whole automation of the process. From the partnership standpoint, when you say, it is not, the cross-industry and academics alliances, for example, collaboration within the universities and institute for applied, AI research will be helpful. Digital twin, I already mentioned that, and the most important thing is supply chain and customer co-innovation. How do we, make that real-time data visible and shared with our customers and within the supply chain? I think so that is another big thing from the partnership standpoint. Like predicting the demand, right? I mean, how do you predict the demand so we can share it with our suppliers, so better manage the supply chain? A lot of people look at the cash flow, when you look at the Wall Street cash flow, how do we manage that? How do you reduce the inventory, right? So that definitely will be a key a step towards, toward that initiative.
I completely agree with you. It's innovation and resilience should reinforce each other, I think, because you have to maintain both of them. I think it's really important for us to use, as Ravindra said, digital twin. I think for us it's maybe the more important tool to use to test our process before to go to the production and to get some information and uh, to put into the serial production with a high level of maturity than we have in the last year, because we can test and again, and even uh, every week, every month, you can test with more detail, with more reality, and that is completely crazy for me, because we are using that digital twin intensively last month, and they give us a lot of information without interrupt the supply chain management, with interrupt the production, and we cause any stop of the customer deliveries. That is very important. Also, I think also really important is the people, because with all these kind of tools like digital twin, I can change some way of work. For example, from engineers, they don't make tasks, they more add value tasks or works. They can spend more time to think, to analyze, to test, than use the time to solve the problem in the production line. They change a little bit the role. That is so important for me, because they use more the mind than the make a drawing or something like that with this kind of tool. And I get this is also a good advance for us.
Excellent. The time is running out and we can probably have hours of discussion on this topic. But maybe one last question, to both of you, and if you can possibly summarize in one, sentence, do you think this, or what is the biggest change you think is going to be? And maybe Miguel, you being a tier one OEM supplier, you're seeing these dark factories coming up, these large car manufacturers with the adoption of AI, humanoids, whatever you want to, talk about. What do you think agentic AI and autonomous operations will drive the biggest change in the near future, maybe in the next 3 years or so?
Yes, I think it's not against the human. I think it's together. I think it's we have to think together to collaborative human to augment the human possibility. I think agentic AI could automate a lot of things we do routine and so on, but the people have to make new things. That is the same and the history. I read a couple of days a doctor in Japan. They tried to treat a patient with cancer and was impossible with a different treatment. And they used for the first one artificial intelligence to try to find the correct proportion of the component in the treatment, and they solve the problem and they find the cure, and they say, okay, at the end I can make like a doctor because artificial intelligence could calculate and test and so on, and I a doctor, I don't need to calculate. That is a good point for me to close the discussion at this point.
Great example. Ravi, quick thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, 3 to 5 years, when you say, especially on the agentic AI and autonomous operation, I feel like it will definitely transform. And I'm not saying all the automation will be like that, but it will definitely transform. From static automated processes to be more kind of adaptive and self-adjusting, optimizing system out. Let's say um, that's what I feel uh, uh, will be with the evolution of agentic AI. And you never know, things might speed up fast, given so much investment pouring into the AI. I guess it comes down to uh, um, how do we make a well-educated investment in this area. Again, like I said, it's given that you're looking for 2 years payback, you have to be very impactful in what you do. So one example I would say, one or two probably, digital twin simulation will be very key for that, to for simulation testing and optimizing it before even you actually go and do it in a real world. That's where I feel like will speed things up.
No, thank you so much, Ravi. And this has been a very enriching discussion for Sharath and myself, and I'm sure for our audience joining online as well. I'm sure they have hundreds of questions. There've been such interesting topics, and you've shared your real life experiences. We will definitely continue the engagement with our audience through the social media. So we'll respond to the questions offline because we don't have time to take those questions right now. But this has been fantastic. And once again, thank you very much, Ravi and Miguel, for joining us and spending your valuable time and sharing your experience as well. So thank you so much from Cognizant side. And I urge all the audience who've joined online to download our white paper. We're going to follow this up with a face-to-face roundtable soon in EMEA as well as in the US. So continue the engagement and continue to watch this space as we bring more exciting topics to you. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for a great discussion. Special thanks to Anuj and Sharath for guiding today's conversation, and of course to Ravi and Miguel for their contributions. To our audience, thank you for your engagement and hope today's discussion has been insightful and enjoyable. For any unanswered questions, rest assured we'll be reaching out to you via email in the coming days. Also, be sure to check your inbox for the recording of today's session, which will be arriving in the next few hours. On behalf of Cognizant and all of us here at Connect Global Group, thank you for joining us today. Wishing you all a productive and wonderful rest of your day.